She reads books, like, for fun. No way.
So here's a topic I've been finding equally interesting yet frustrating, depending on how you look at it. Content warnings on the screen, by the way. If you happen to orbit the side of TikTok that discusses anything pertaining to books, reading, and romance, then you may have noticed a trend in the way some of these discussions end up skewing. And a big chunk of it leads right back to a little community called BookTok, and how the kind of books this community enjoys are bleeding into things like bookshop recommendations and everyday discussions of readings in general. So for those of you who are normal, BookTok is basically a community on TikTok, just in case that bit needed spelling out, who treats reading for fun in your spare time in the same way as a fandom or an aesthetic. Essentially, many people feel as if BookTok has commodified reading as a kind of overconsumption posturing exercise, which more so rewards the perception of the activity as opposed to the activity itself. People post about sitting with a book and a matcha, but the page is the exact same one as the last 7 posts. They line their bookcases with visually pleasing covers that they never actually read the contents of, and post a long laundry list of books that sound interesting or impressive, but these books are never brought up again, and no commentary has been offered by the people listing them off and raving about them. At least, this is what I've heard other people rant and rave about, in addition to the fact that, supposedly, a lot of the books that BookTok especially love and recommend are of a specific variety. Basically, a lot of these books are of the spicy, romanticy variety. Some are decent, some are bad, some are consensual, and some are not so much. I myself have a few friends who are very much in the throes of the particular books that BookTok worships at the moment, and our group chat for the past year and a half, I want to say, has been dedicated to what books they've all been reading, when they get good, what exactly the whole appeal is. Full disclosure, I like books. I enjoy history novels and queer horror. Also, here's my hot take for the week, but I cannot stand Stephen King. I said it. I think he has some great ideas, but I cannot vibe with his writing style personally. But the point being, I enjoy reading, but I'm not a crazy fast or voracious reader in any sense. So it's been pretty interesting to see a community that boasts such an acute fascination towards something that everyone is complaining about the decline of being bashed so brazenly. And another reason I've been finding this particular phenomenon so fascinating is because it not only seems to be going against the grain of the emerging trend of conservative views on romance and expression of desire, but it also seems to be influencing screen-based media and entertainment as well, which is a lot closer to my ballpark. If the quite frankly atrocious new Wuthering Heights adaptation is anything to go by, which we'll also be talking about today, I am honestly just so intrigued by the dichotomy between this weird rise in purity culture and not wanting sex to be the focus of our media, versus how these stories place themes of intense physical desire as the focal point. Is this something that anyone else has noticed? Is it just me? Am I just noticing this a lot more because I'm ace and also a resident woolower? Because that's another layer too. A lot of these spicy books are very centered around women who date men as a huge part of the demographic. Not all of them and not all the time, but they're definitely a big part of the reader base. But whatever the case is, that's why we're here. So let's take a look into it. Hello everyone, my name is fionapollo, and today I wanted to look into modern reading culture and how a large portion of the discussion to do with reading has been swept up in this romantasy mania which has apparently been spurred on by BookTok, and how exactly this is also influencing a wave of screen adaptations that play into this trend. Is this actually the case? Is it a good or bad thing? Does it really matter so long as people are actually reading something instead of brain rotting on their phones 24/7? Well, why don't we all take a look together and find out? And of course, if you like what I'm putting down here, please consider liking, subscribing, and hyping the video. I talk about storytelling and narrative tropes, animation, and pop culture. I'm so sorry in advance to my regular viewers. This is a bit more removed from my usual topics, but I feel very strongly about some of the things we're about to discuss, so bear with me. Now then, why don't we begin by setting the scene?
It's not right for a woman to read. Soon she starts getting ideas and thinking.
You know what, why don't we start by acknowledging the elephant in the room? Fiction is obviously not reality, but the reality is that the current dating and romance culture is fucking atrocious. Just gonna throw in a disclaimer, I'm talking about people who are currently single and attempting to find a partner in 2026. People with established relationships and decent partners obviously aren't going to experience this to the same degree, but to give a rundown, COVID basically ruined a lot of people's socialization and ability to connect with each other by proxy, and this has altered the current dating scene and ergo the concept of modern romance from a wistful dream into a complete nightmare. Many individuals are completely audacious and tone-deaf in their approach towards potential partners, and many others are also finding the idea of settling down in the traditional sense to be a death sentence to their autonomy. The current social climate brought on by a generation of people being trapped indoors and spending a significant amount of time in isolation is causing so many disruptions and changes to modern understandings of relationships that men, women, and everyone outside or in between are struggling to adjust, causing no end of friction, misunderstanding, and hostility to the point that various institutions have declared it a loneliness epidemic. And I know that many people are going to be like, it's a male loneliness epidemic actually, but let's be real. Yes, some men are terrible, especially the ones you see online, but make no mistake, some women are just as terrible to men and other women, and it's not cute. There are still good people out there, but I can see why so many are opting to become a lot more choosy. I'm not saying it's bad to have standards, but relationships are like homes. They don't always come fully furnished, and sometimes you need to put in a bit of work to build it up and maintain it to make it somewhere you really love spending time in. But obviously, if a house has a lot of internal issues, then it's totally valid to step away. Not everyone can be a bricklayer. But what do you do in this situation? Well, I can't speak for everyone, but countless people have done what many before them also did, and have retreated into numerous worlds of fiction, fantasy, and romance that allow you to live vicariously through any number of interesting characters with much more exciting lives and infinitely more successful romantic endeavors. This has more so been a pastime that women have indulged in more than men through the ages. According to some research shared by the International Federation of Arts Councils and Culture Agencies, in 2022, 46.9% of women reported reading fiction novels, compared to 27.7% of men in the same year. These figures were reported in the same article to have dropped significantly from earlier years as people are reading less than they were 10 or so years ago, but the actual percentage difference between men and women remained largely the same. It's also not just books that people do this with, obviously. TV shows, movies, comics, and even YouTube videos can have this escapist quality to them. It's not a new or unique behavior for us to long for something better than we already have, and so it makes sense for people to romanticize having a bit of guilt-free excitement at the prospect of being whisked away to some far-off land to live in the lap of luxury or to be the object of desire that entirely consumes a love interest's entire being. These books are unrealistic and fantastical, and you know what? On that level, I understand the appeal, because who actually wants to live in reality right now? And of course, not everyone takes this mega seriously either. A really good and hilarious example of this is the YN meme that was going around a few months ago. Basically, people were making short videos from an outside perspective, giving commentary on the typical dynamic you see in a lot of romance webcomics, where the leading lady is this stand-in character for the reader and is described as a beautiful, precious, dainty, effortless beauty, and her love interest, who is almost always a rich company CEO, is this big, brooding, serious man with a chin pointier than a sacrificial blade and shoulders that span the size of a walk-in wardrobe. And they are just absolutely shameless about their relationship in front of the whole office. The receptionist just got launched out of a window by her boss for having a nicer shade of nail polish than YN, because how dare she? Clearly, it was a malicious act of bullying, and the CEO was only protecting what's his. Oh my fucking god, did I really just fucking say that? It's hilarious, it's dumb, it's stupid, and you can't help but laugh at the irony of it. And honestly, I think that's part of the appeal with many of these books. The people reading them are self-aware enough to know it's not actually realistic, and I don't think they actually want something like that in real life, but hey, it's still fun to read about. I think part of why people are so enraged about it in recent years is a combination of things, but one of the most long-standing criticisms has always been that people will find any reason to complain about women liking something. It's completely fine and even impressive for guys to be obsessed with comic books where all the women superheroes have crazy sexual poses and proportions, but a woman in her 30s enjoying a bit of raunchy romping in a romance novel? Outrage. Outrage. I think there is potentially some criticism to be given. Like, for example, there is a whole discussion surrounding consent that needs to be had. A lot of these romance books do not have very consensual physical relationships within them. There is a lot of weird kind of like power dynamics going on. It's very heteronormative as well. Another issue that I have seen some people express is that the rise of popularity in these books has made them more accessible to those who probably shouldn't read them, such as those under a certain age. But to be honest with you, I think that especially is more so a lesson in actually watching what your children are engaging with and sitting with the fact that sometimes things are going to slip through the cracks. And the best thing to do in that situation is to have a respectful discussion with your kid, as opposed to blaming the world around them for not being hyper-vigilant. This is something that happens with screen-based media as well. How many times have the cast of Has Been Hotel had to call out the fact that children are being let loose unmonitored at convention panels for a show that is explicitly 18+? It's not the world's responsibility to constantly shrink itself for the sake of someone else's weak constitution. But that said, these kind of romantasy books aren't exactly everyone's cup of tea, so what's the draw here?
Hey, why ain't you running?
Well, I can't read.
From a reader's perspective, despite being the appropriate age and being a lady, I regret to inform that I am very much not the target audience for these kinds of books. The largest reader base for this specific reading material is hetero-leaning women in their 20s and 30s. But that kind of brings me to my next point. What exactly do people find appealing about them, and why? I've always been happy to just sit back and listen to what my friends think about these stories, but in all honesty, my stance on them has very much always been, why would you spend your money on these when you can just read fanfiction for free? And I have said this to them in the past past because, if we're being completely honest, a lot of these books tend to follow the same pipeline as one very infamous example, which we will talk about a little bit later on. BookTok is kind of obsessed with smut, as we've already established, which again raises my main question. If that's what you're after, then why not just go straight to the website that gives it to you for free? It's accessible, it's free, and you can filter out anything you especially don't want to get flashbanged with. Why spend all this money? Also, I keep asking about the money, not because I think it's necessarily bad to gamble on paying for a good story, but mostly because I'm just kind of a huge cheapskate. I guess I'm just kind of mystified as to why you would willingly buy this stuff when you have an archive of free infinite stories of any number of your favorite characters, whether you want them to get down or not. But maybe that in itself is part of the problem. Not everyone is super into reading unofficial content of their favorite franchises or want to risk getting the ick from beloved characters acting in a way they normally wouldn't. So I guess there is that to consider. We also have the fact that a lot of fanfiction is written by queer people who use it to explore their own identities, and a good portion of the people reading these smutty novels also happen to have a lot of repressed feelings about their own approaches to both orientation, gender, and where that places them when reading a story. I also just personally couldn't imagine having a physical item like that in my house. If you have someone come over for whatever reason, and I know for a fact that I am related to some nosy motherfuckers, they can and will look through your stuff if given the chance. It's kind of like having a saucy magazine or like a risque DVD tucked in among your regular collections, in my opinion. I don't need people knowing that about me, okay? It doesn't compute to me that people are so comfortable having that stuff out in the open. But all that is to say, to actually get to the bottom of this conundrum, I did the sensible thing, and I literally just asked my friends what it is about these books that they like so much, and the answers were refreshingly insightful. I'm just going to paraphrase, but one of them told me that she heard about it from TikTok, but also from her boyfriend whose co-worker was really into them, and she went into it believing it was dumb, and while reading these books didn't change that, she did end up finding them really enjoyable regardless. The books are easy to digest, they're written in an approachable language and often utilize predictable stories that provide a sense of comfort in the convention. She also said it was quite similar to watching Gossip Girl or eating McDonald's. It's high-calorie, trashy content in which you know exactly what you're getting, basically. But even despite that, my friend went on to explain that reading these types of smutty, predictable books helped her to kickstart her love of reading again. For about 10 years, she was trying to set goals for reading and could barely get through 50 pages. She'd buy lifestyle books that were supposed to coach you through being smarter or healthier, but they never got finished. She'd buy books that were award winners or were said to be thought-provoking, but she just couldn't get into them. But since reading these BookTok smut stories, she's managed to blast through 100 books in 2 years. And not all of those ended up being this specific kind of reading. It also enabled her to engage with a wider breadth of genres and topics as a result, including sci-fi, high fantasy, children's classics, fiction, LGBT, translated books. And she attributed all that to allowing herself to read something just for the joy of reading rather than the pressure of reading something correctly. Not everyone is able to read or even process information in the same way, and not everyone likes the same stuff. And it has often been a point of indisputable fact that the world of book reading is steeped in this weird sense of historical snobbery. Everyone has their own opinion about what the correct sort should be and what types of books should be celebrated. But what is also a significant factor with these kinds of stories has to do with a lot of modern sensibilities and attitudes towards female sexuality. Look, we ladies, lady adjacents, are going to get shamed no matter what end of the spectrum we land in. If you like sex and are open about it, you're going to have people calling you used goods or a whore or telling you you're wrong for doing so. But if you go the other way and don't like sex, then you're called a prude and are all of a sudden seen as more of a challenge as opposed to a person with preferences. But when it comes to these books, female sexuality is almost fully embraced and accepted as normal, which my friends cited as another big appeal to them. One other personal observation I'm just going to throw in here as well is that I think women also especially enjoy these books because we tend to have this collective baggage surrounding the concept of being seen and not heard. That carries its own negative connotations, but it can also help us to kind of become invisible in a sense. What, you seriously going to attack someone for being too quiet? Really? For reading a book? For being smart? Get over yourselves. Books are just words on a page. You can't hear someone reading on the other side of the house like you can hear someone watching TV. The book can be as rowdy or raunchy as a given reader's imagination and reading speed will allow, but on the whole, it's a quiet activity that doesn't take up too much space, which I think just adds a whole other layer of irony atop this entire discussion. So what happens when such books finally make that transition from print to screen? Emerald Fennel, for your crimes against classic fiction, I sentence you to the barefoot Lego walk of shame for the rest of your days. I'm a fairly neutral person about a lot of stuff, but if there's one thing I heavily dislike, especially when it comes to cinema, it's when a director leeches off an existing IP's popularity to tell a story that should have really been an original, but they just clearly didn't have all that much faith in its success. At least that's how this adaptation of Wuthering Heights comes across to me, which isn't exactly promising. I've seen so many reviews and think pieces and opinions shared about the new Wuthering Heights film that my main takeaway from it is pretty simple. We cannot prep, season, cook, and eat the rich fast enough, apparently. I don't necessarily consider myself a film snob. I believe in people embracing and enjoying shit films because I think it makes us more interesting as individuals. I think it is within everyone's interest to choose a terrible film and make it their entire personality for a bit. Before we get further into this, I know for a fact that many of you watching have no idea what Wuthering Heights is about, and if you thought this would be a video where I actually explain it to you, then I hate to disappoint. What I can tell you is that the story itself covers a wide breadth of themes that still carry over today, including complicated toxic relationships, the cycle of abuse, mental illness, grief, racism, and so much more. I'm not going to pretend I've read it, I haven't, but I've known of and understand its relevance in literary circles for a pretty long time, and it has resonated with a very large number of people because of all those themes. It has a lot of moving parts, and it's an enduring classic for a reason. The thing is, and this is something I remember seeing at least one film review mention, is that I don't think anyone would be so incensed about how bad of a fumble this film is if it wasn't claiming to be an adaptation of Wuthering Heights. An adaptation this drastically different from the original text may as well just adopt its own IP and become its own thing, in my opinion. As I mentioned before, my personal take on this is that the reason they decided to use this IP was because people who are aware of the book will recognize the name, fans of the book will hate watch it, and horny people will watch anything so long as there is at least some level of sex appeal. And it's not even that all aspects of the film are bad either. The music and visuals of the film have been consistently praised by those who are doing their best to provide a balanced critique. The biggest issue, aside from the whitewashing of Heathcliff for some reason, is one that coincided with a press tour interview with the director, who tells us that she wanted to recapture how she felt reading the novel in her younger years. And this one instance of how she framed this fascination with the story purely under the guise of lust, without seemingly any care or consideration for the wider themes of abuse and manipulation that run parallel, is what rubbed so many people the wrong way about this film. And it's also why so many are choosing to pin their frustrations onto BookTok due to how similarly the film coincides with the community's favoured stories. And I guess in that regard, we can't really talk about this without at least bringing up 50 Shades of Grey for a second. Oh my god. Where do I even start with this? I'm definitely not the person of authority on this topic, but this book series, and by extension the films, especially, were the catalyst for Hollywood to sit up and realise, we can actually make money from lonely women with this. The 50 Shades series also had a heavy focus on a complicated toxic relationship, but ended up with a very divisive reception because of it. On the one hand, people worried that it glamorizes abusive relationships and the crossing of boundaries, while on the other hand, cinema staff were finding left behind cucumbers after showings. I bet you wish I'd never told you that, don't you? I wish I never found out. Don't worry about it. Honestly, thinking about it, I think the only way I've seen a concept like this work is when it's comedic. In 2022, me and my partner watched the film The Lost City in cinemas, and guys, first of all, I am consistently impressed at Channing Tatum's acting chops, but the film itself is essentially a parody of the smut romantasy genre, which actually focuses on an author of said books, and the book's cover model essentially being flung into one of the many insane adventures. And you know what? I think that film is fantastic. It's hilarious. I'd watch it again any day before I'd even consider watching 2026's Wuthering Heights. The reason these kinds of stories work so well in text as opposed to film, in my opinion, is because it plays into that idea of leaving everything up to the imagination. Another big part of the appeal surrounding books in general, to be honest. It's like when you have daydreams of someone maybe trying a cheesy pickup line on someone versus seeing it actually play out and getting secondhand embarrassment. It seems like it would be a sweet and adorable thing, and then it happens and you just wish you could erase the scene from your brain, you know? The screen is a very fickle form of media, and it can be hard to make any sort of cross-media adaptation because everyone is going to have their own personal vision of what certain characters would be like, or how the setting would look, or how impactful certain phrases or lines would be when spoken aloud. But at the end of the day, these stories and mediums only hold as much power as you allow them to have over you. I'm not going to watch Wuthering Heights, and once all this attention dies down, I'm probably going to forget that it exists. And for me at least, I think that is something that we can all at least be a little bit grateful for. So, all in all, is BookTok smut bleeding into screen-based media? If we want to be honest with ourselves, it's not bleeding in any more than it has for the past decade. The kinds of stories, be they paper-based or screen-based, come along and end up as focal points for media culture in drips and drabs once every blue moon. The only reason it's being brought to the forefront and is such a hot topic now is because of visibility. Fandom and communities are bigger than they've ever been due to people's increased addiction to social media, and TikTok in particular is one of the biggest platforms at the moment. Wuthering Heights is a popular classic, and it's being created by an up-and-coming director who has worked worked on other films in the past that have managed to make waves. I think what we're seeing is just the perfect storm of two worlds colliding, but I don't know how long that's actually going to last. Is this good or bad? It depends. It can be good in the sense that women are now being the main audience, being catered to, and as my friend mentioned, BookTok's terrible romantasy books have actually spurred many to read more books than ever. The downside is the predictable formula, questionable ethics and understanding surrounding consent, and the potential risk of sex having an even stronger chokehold on daily life than it already has isn't exactly something that everyone is excited about. Does all of this actually matter? Small stuff always matters to at least some degree, even if some may not deem it important enough for them to think about. It matters to someone, and these books matter to a surprising amount of women. I think the best thing to advise on that is to just be aware that others are always going to have opinions about what you enjoy, but so long as you aren't hurting anyone, I genuinely wouldn't sweat it. But hey, that's all I have for you today, folks. I don't feel like I had a super solid point in mind for this topic. I just wanted to talk about something that I've been seeing a lot of and had some degree of investment in. But nevertheless, thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. I try to post a video every 2 weeks, so if you like what I discussed today, don't forget to like, subscribe, hype the video, or leave a comment. What do you think of BookTok? What do you think of romantasy in general? What do you think of screen adaptations? Feel free to let me know. A massive thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters, as always. Thank you to my tip jar supporter, Pedanti Cat. Thank you to my YouTube peeps, Manuel Legzon Gonzalez, Mystic Mind, Lauren R, Ash Valentine, Lonim the Hare, Craig, Edboy, Stefka's Doodles, and Why Not Warrior. And of course, an extra special thank you to my indie production supporters, Morgan LaFay Thin, Matty A, Kiyoshi, and Roundcat. If you're interested in joining the Patreon, a link can be found in the video description. Stay safe, everyone, and I will speak to you all very soon. Bye!